or in general debates. This is particularly true during a special election like this one, when the campaign season is short and turnout can be very low. But we're holding this forum tonight to make sure the environment is top of mind for the candidates and for voters. The New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund is committed to educating, engaging, and empowering New Yorkers to be advocates for the environment. We equip voters with reliable information about local and statewide sustainability issues, and we encourage New Yorkers to hold elected officials and candidates accountable to their promises of fighting climate change, protecting public health, and standing up for other important environmental issues. Tonight is a perfect example of our mission in action. Traditionally, when New Yorkers head to the polls, they consider the candidate stances on critical issues such as education, healthcare, and the economy. And we want to make sure sustainability and environmental health are as high a priority for voters and for the candidates themselves. By being here tonight, you're sending a message that New Yorkers care about having a healthy environment, a livable climate for generations to come, and are paying attention during this special election. We're happy to be in Queens tonight and to be hosting this forum with the Jackson Heights Beautification Group. We're also very grateful for the supporters of our sponsors who helped make this event happen: Capolino and Company, CMW Strategies, Constantinople and Malone Consulting, and Urban Strategies. We also want to thank the New York Hall of Science for hosting this event. Lastly, I want to thank all of our valuable partners who helped spread the word about the forum tonight. We hope we continue to work with you on all local and citywide environmental issues, including the Eastern Queens Alliance, Tri-State Transportation Coalition, New Yorkers for Park, Regional Plan Association, Guardians of Flushing Bay, and the Waterfront Alliance. I would like to mention also that a law I worked on since 2008 was enacted by the state legislature last year, and that bans plastic bags starting on March 1st. I was unable to lobby for it last year because I wrote the governor's bill, and that was very frustrating. But because of that, we want to make sure everyone knows about this law and make sure that people are using reusable bags. So if you registered to come to the event tonight, or if you signed up for our list today, you are eligible for a free reusable bag that we'll be giving out later this evening. So thank you to everyone, and we as you notice, we are equipping our candidates with reusable water bottles. You don't need so much plastic, reusable bags, so thank you very much. You can't have an event without props, right? So now it is my pleasure to introduce you to tonight's moderator. Katie Homan is a Queens native, a well-known Mets fan, and an award-winning reporter who covers City Hall in New York City for the Wall Street Journal. By the way, she talks to me anyways, even though I'm a Yankees fan. Katie previously covered Queens for the late DNA Info and was NBC4 New York's first social media editor. She's won 3 Emmy Awards, a local award for business journalism, and an Edward R. Murrow Award. Katie is a graduate of St. John's University and CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. So thank you, Katie. Take it over to you.
Thank you, Julie, and everyone for coming out tonight, and for the candidates who are here. Like Julie said, these issues are very important, obviously, for the whole city, but particularly for Queens, with the largest beach in the city and the nicest one. That's my perspective. And bays and flooding issues and lots of environmental concerns. The airports, all these issues that have come up that affect the environment. So, we just wanted to give everyone the chance to ask that. So what we'll do first is we'll do intros from the candidates. We want to start with Costa and talk a little bit about yourself, and if you want to talk a little bit about environmental issues that are important to you. We have about 2 minutes each. Maybe you guys we're waiting on the board, so you're a little bit longer. The kind of general rules for these apply: be respectful. We have someone keeping time up front. Don't run over. Don't insult each other. I think you've been through a lot. You've been through it a lot. So yeah, we want to start. Just the councilman will want to start. Introduce yourself and talk a little bit about, especially environmental issues.
Good evening, everyone. Great to see you all here. Thank you to the League. Thank you to the Hall of Science. My name is Costa Constantinides, and I'm so glad to have a debate around sustainability and the environment. because usually I feel somewhat left out when we're talking about these issues, and none of those issues come up at many debates that we have. So thank you for putting this together to shine the focus on what is the challenge of our generation. I'm really running to transform Queens, and as the environmental chair of the City Council, since 2015, as someone who's been able to shepherd through 30 bills on the environment, including the Climate Mobilization Act last year, which was the largest emissions reduction policy, not just in New York City, but any city in the world. I just want to thank you all for continuing your advocacy. Now, we have to transform Queens. We need to, when it comes to the main powers of the Borough President on land use, it's about making sure that there's sustainable development. Rising seas and rising rents are forcing people from their homes. So it's about making sure there's truly affordable housing, about making sure when we're building it that it's actually built sustainably. And that when the men and women who are building the buildings, they should be able to afford, they should be getting union jobs as part of it. So the men and women who are building and who are working there should be able to afford to live in those neighborhoods as well. Secondly, on budget, I want to make sure we're focusing on climate. So that's $40 to $70 million a year in city capital. So that's solarizing and green roofing every city building in the borough of Queens. That's doubling our green space. That's making sure that instead of having a driver and have a black SUV that the borough president's office is being driven around in, it's about taking those resources and instead having a deputy borough president for sustainability. Because we need someone who's working on these issues full time, and we cannot wait. It's about coordinating sustainability and resiliency, because when President Trump talks about mops and buckets for the next storm, we can't wait. But it's also about connecting our kids to this. It's about having solar curriculum. It's about having science, STEM, and technology in the classrooms. It's, last year I got to go with Katie on the CUNY 1. CUNY has a boat. Oh, there we go, I stopped. So it's also about transit, having a board member on the MTA board. If there's not, I thought we were getting a little longer because Liz wasn't here. But there she is, okay. They were giving us extra time because you weren't here yet. So, okay, you broke the rules. So I'll say this, making sure that we have better transit, a borough-wide transportation plan, making sure that we have a board member if we don't have municipal control on the MTA, and then having the borough's president's office in our neighborhoods. All these issues around sustainability and resiliency we can all do within the borough president's powers. Thank you very much.
Again, my name is Anthony Miranda. It's good to be here with you. This has been, let me start like this. I'm not a politician, right? I'm a father, married, 3 kids. I happen to use the parks around here, come to the museum often with my family, and have seen the dwindling of our communities all over the city of New York, right? The overdevelopment of city property, the unaccountability of sustainability at all the development that's going on. No mandate that tells them that they have to have an environmental study before they do it. There's no studies that are being done about the impact that all these new structures, the strain on local resources that are happening in our community. There's nothing to talk about to say sustainability. It is unfortunate that, again, we have a city agency, a city of New York. Well, how about having all the vehicles that belong to the carpool of the city of New York become electric, except for the emergency vehicles? This would be an immediate response, something that's immediately doable. We don't have to wait 5 or 10 years to get this done, and it would have an immediate impact on the community around us. Right? There are a lot of long-term plans, but as I found when we sat down with many of the experts, there are a lot of short-term plans that are easily implemented, but they're just a general failure to want to do it. Again, I know it's election time, and we get a lot of good issues on election time, but then there's 12 years, 8 years, 15 years. What was the work that was done throughout the entire time that we're talking about? Why is it taking so long for us? It's a crisis now because they've neglected us all this time. It becomes a crisis that we have to address because there's been years of neglect and unwillingness to take on the hard fight early on, so we wouldn't be in a crisis mode where we're currently facing right now. And the fact that we're in that says that we need immediate responses. We can no longer wait for long-term policies that take 6 to 8 years to implement. 30 seconds. as such, but the Queens Borough President has that ability to give it a voice, a permanent position in its office, and to ensure that all the development that's going on has the climate impact that we're looking for right now, before they start building, before they start breaking ground. These are all conversations that happen in advance of any approval of any of these projects, which currently has not been done. So feasibility studies and also the climate impact on our community is important. Been all over Queens, and it seems like there's more than one part of Queens that's going underground right now. When you go to all these homes, they're all being flooded out. The sewers are backing up. My time is gonna. The sewers are backing up, so it's the same process all over Queens in different neighborhoods, and it's impacting the same thing. That means that our infrastructure has not been built to support what's going on around us right now. Thank you.
Thank you. And I am New York City Councilmember Donovan Richards, and I have a very unique perspective on climate change because I represent the Rockaways, Laurelton, Rosedale, Springfield Gardens, and Southeast Queens, and my community actually is on the front lines when it comes to the devastation of what climate change can do when you look at how the beach and the bay met, but how that impacted communities of color in particular as well. And it's very important that I frame this conversation around environmental justice, because the only way to resolve the climate crisis is to address the inequities that we see in our communities. And this is why in 2013 I was the first African American to chair the Committee of Environmental Protection in the Council, which led me to really working on a lot of the systematic environmental racist policies and inequities in the investments that we've seen in communities of color historically. That led me to securing $2.2 billion for Southeast Queens. So as he mentioned, there are people's homes underwater when it rains, 55 projects. We also passed legislation that now requires the mayor to report on how and where that money is being spent on those projects. I also co-authored the city's environmental plan with the mayor, the One NYC plan, which really is the blueprint of where we need to go as a city to address climate change. We also fought ferociously against the Port Ambrose and Williams pipeline. For those of you who are against fracking, we led that fight in the city council. I also founded the Greener NYC initiative in the council, which is the council's first environmental initiative, which is now going up to over $2 million, which enables us to teach kids green education, train people in green jobs, and also do cleanups. I also passed legislation which updated New York City's air code, which was the first time this actually has happened since 1961. That bill enabled us to phase out number 4 oil, because we know dirty oil in buildings is the #1 contributor to climate change. I secured $200 million in park money for my district. We also passed legislation to ban smoking in subsidized housing. I believe that every child in every community in New York City deserves free, clean air, and it should not be a luxury for some. And then in terms of development, I gotta stop. But in terms of development, I'm happy to say we have 7 development projects coming up in the Rockaways. All of the development projects that have been completed already have solar panel. We're actually cutting a ribbon on a geothermal building. The rents are gonna be $300 for a studio on the beach. So if you like Queens and you wanna stay here, come to Rockaway Beach. God bless you all. I got more to talk about, but we've done a lot of work around this, and we've got a lot of work to make sure we address climate change in the city of New York, in particular in Queens. Thank you.
Good evening. It's great to be here at New York Hall of Science, and a cultural institution here in Queens that I funded as a council member. I want to thank the New York League of Conservation Voters for hosting tonight's forum, and all the other companies that came together to sponsor. I want to thank Katie Honan for being the moderator. I am Elizabeth Crowley, and I was born right here in Queens, one of 15 children. So I guess my parents didn't realize that the world was overpopulated. But hey, I was born the 14th, so my mom always said, just be happy you're here, because what are your odds? But we grew up in a house where, growing up there, you can imagine so many kids under one roof. We certainly didn't have a very big environmental footprint. And we couldn't all fit in a car, so we did walk a lot of places. But I went on to study art restoration in college. I didn't study politics or government. I was hoping to be an artist, and I worked as an artist for many years. After graduating college, I worked on many historic landmarks, Radio City Music Hall, St. Patrick's Cathedral, Central Synagogue. I got active with my union, the Painters Union, and they encouraged me to get more involved in government. At the time, I was a single mother with 2 school-age boys, and I started to get involved in my community as well. And through the work with the Painters Union, I started to realize that I wasn't alone as a single mom struggling in New York City. And I went back to school and I studied architecture and urban planning because I wanted to make sure that we left this world a better place for our kids, for very much the reasons why we are here tonight, for sustainability, for our future. And so when I was elected to the New York City Council in 2008, the district that I represented, I was elected as the first Democrat, the first woman, and also the first union member. And now I have to stop. Thank you.
I just wanted to go over briefly a little bit of the format. I'm going to ask 3 questions. We're going to do a lightning round of some fun questions and ask a couple more. And there is an opportunity for question and answer from the audience. We're submitting on cards in the back. So if you have cards, please submit it. I know this was brought up. The first question is it's focused on one of the biggest issues of climate change, which is flooding. So I guess what we can do is, since Mike with you, is we can do it that way. So this question is really focused on, as Borough President, how you would address the combined sewer overflow, CSO impacts, and flooding risks that are caused by increased waterfront development here in the city. And I mean, would you require something like site stormwater or wastewater management or a net zero CSO discharge for all new development? This is a concern. There's lots of flooding and sewer backup,
So when I was in the council, I represent neighborhoods like Glendale, Ridgewood, and Maspeth, and we have 3 different sewer systems in Queens. So funny enough, that community was either the end or the beginning, as you would look. It was very much a centered landlocked area where it would be furthest away and more likely to get flooded. And my first year in office, there was a storm that happened, which was considered the 500-year storm, except that my second year in office, it happened as well. In 2008 and 2009, we saw real devastation because of the lack of infrastructure. So we built out a sewer system. I was able to get over $100 million invested into my community, and working with my colleagues during the years that I was in the council, over $2 billion. So that was to increase the structure of the sewer so that you wouldn't have significant overflow or flooding when a heavy rainstorm came. But we also put in a significant number of swales and trees to make sure that we had more permeable surfaces, which is so important. But in many parts of Queens, we need to look to put containers, and we could use the ground, the earth that we're able to dig up to help ensure that our waterways, our shorelines get built up stronger, because Jamaica Bay, Flushing Bay, Newtown Creek, they all are areas where we have significant storm surges, and that is important too, that we protect our shorelines, not just the ocean. And so it's important that we look to projects like that, that we make sure that when there are heavy storms, that this storm and our sewage doesn't go into our ocean or bays and pollute our communities. So we need to have a plan to do better while we work together in the council to do improvements. It's not enough, and we need a borough president that's going to continue to work to make our storm water not go into our oceans. Rather, our sewer water not go into our oceans.
Well, thank you, and earlier I spoke about the work we've done around infrastructure. We secured, I'm not talking about what we're going to do, but we've secured $2.2 billion already, 55 projects slated for Southeast Queens, a neighborhood that historically has not seen the investment going back 40 years. We did not see the sewer system built out. Part of that is what's part of the $2.2 billion is gray infrastructure, but we also secured another $200 million in green infrastructure, which is something critical when you talk about making sure that our natural habitat also can assist us in addressing the CSO issue. Another issue I have to talk about is the groundwater issue in Queens, in South Queens in particular as well. And I know we're going to speak about every part of Queens, but once again, we cannot address this issue without talking about the injustices that communities of color have faced going back 40 years in communities like mine. And the water table is so high in some of our particular areas. And one of the things I would do as borough president is really continue to push DEP and DEC to look at that issue. We also secured another $200 million for the Rockaways, and that is going to assist us in building out some park space around Jamaica Bay. This was an area that pretty much we had bulkheads in parts of Harvard as well, where the city did not necessarily maintain, but we see this as an opportunity to also address many of the gray infrastructure and green infrastructure issues as well. And the other thing that we have to be aware of is obviously the Army Corps of Engineers has a plan right now, which is going to be built around parts of the bay, and they have several proposals right now to really shield some of our communities, that waterfront communities right now, and we're going to need to ensure that even as the Army Corps looks at things like gates, that we're looking at creative ways to ensure green infrastructure is a big part of that project, so we're not necessarily impacting our wildlife and other things, our ecosystem in the bay as well. So those are some concrete things I think we can do. But once again, the investments are there, and we have a lot of work to continue to address the CSO issue, but green infrastructure is a big piece of that. Thank you.
So as I indicated in my opening end, is that you have a number of developments that are going on currently, and there have been no feasibility studies and no environmental studies done with the approval of these projects on a long-term basis. They're city-owned property, they are taking up a lot of our space, and they are not being compensated. There's no green space being allocated toward these projects. There is no impact as to what impact it has in the direct communities. And I've been to, from Long Island City over here to the far Rockaways, where you see that there are buildings that are just being flooded over on a regular basis. It tells us that they have not invested in the infrastructure properly to support the ongoing building that's going on and to support these homes that are in these areas. There are multiple areas in Queens, so it's not unique to one area, find it or not. Believe it or not, as you travel around, you'll find a number of the families have been suffering the same thing for many years. It just happened overnight. And those fights are going on right now. They're being organized, the communities are now organizing and raising their voices, and they're trying to hold the political structure accountable to ensuring that the projects that are being recommended are actually being implemented. The Army Corps of Engineers have made several recommendations over the years that have not been followed. They've been compromised and they've been given shortcuts. We're no longer in a place to allow these shortcuts to go on. I think as the Queens Borough President, you need to be a voice to the community, be willing to have these fights and challenge the process to make sure that it's properly funded. But they often say we don't have enough money, but we won't have enough money until the entire borough of Queens goes under, then I think we're in a bad place. Again, I say that we're in a crisis because they didn't fight soon enough to be able to address these issues. And while these projects and these buildings were being done, they didn't hold anybody accountable at the time or after they started the projects to ensure what the impact would be on our families here in Queens.
So last year alone, not too far from here, Flushing Bay, Flushing Creek, 5 billion gallons of sewage ended up in those waterways. Not over the lifetime of the waterway, but just last year, 5 billion gallons of sewage went into our waterways here. This is a sobering number. We need to be working on these issues because climate change is real, but it's only going to get hotter and it's only going to get wetter. The more precipitation we're going to see more combined sewer overflow into our waterways. And we need to have a concrete plan. Now, as council member, I passed legislation 2 years ago that has the city anticipate our precipitation and actually come up with concrete plans to be proactive rather than reactive to what's going on when it comes around flooding and additional precipitation. When you talk about combined sewer, long-term control plans, which are agreements with the state I have legislation I've been working on with Riverkeeper and Swim to sort of reform that process to make sure that we can actually have a larger voice in the communities that will be impacted when it comes to what our agreements are, because sometimes when you're spending $4 billion, it sounds like a lot, but over 25 years, and if you're not tying actual impacts, like your results, it's not where you need to go. Now I'll say briefly, I'm championing an idea that would create a new wastewater treatment plant when they close Rikers Island down, and the League is actually a supporter of this bill, that would actually close down and have a wastewater treatment plant as part of the Renewable Rikers plan that could shut down older wastewater treatment infrastructure and then can actually keep sewage out of our waterways by creating thousands upon thousands union green jobs here in the borough of Queens.
Thank you. And the next question is going to be on sustainable transportation. We have lots of transportation issues and projects in the borough. The Guardia Air Train, airports, bus network redesign. Not sure if anyone's heard of that one. But I just wanted to ask you a very general question about, we can start again with you, Costa. What is the biggest transportation issue in the borough, specifically to sustainability?
Oh, geez, I think if we look at sustainability, it's about breaking car culture, getting people out of their car. We need to make sure, but there has to be a way to do that that is actually sustainable. So we need to have a number of things happen. Number one is a borough-wide transportation plan. Folks in Manhattan, this bus redesign, we needed a redesign. We needed a redesign that made sense for Queens residents. People in Manhattan made these decisions, and they said at the town hall I was out, they made poor assumptions. It shouldn't be about assumptions, it should be about data. It shouldn't be about talking to people. So we need to be designed by Queens residents for Queens residents. Putnam County, 98,602 people. They have more of a voice on the MTA board than Queens do. Queens has no appointees to the MTA board. I put forth an idea to make sure that's the case. And actually, 2 members of the state legislature have already introduced a bill to make it happen. And Ruben Diaz Jr., the Bronx Borough President, has already tweeted out support for my plan to have borough presidents have an appointee, because we need to have an appointment. The bus redesign as well. When the MTA, you think about busways. You think about additional ways to get people, like they're doing on 14th Street, to get out of their cars. There has to be a real way to do that. So we have to come up with more sustainable ideas. When you look at the air train, I have some issues around the air train, what it's going to mean for sustainability of our waterways as well. And I think many of the environmental groups in this room have brought that challenge forward. We need to make sure that we're designing transportation. And then lastly, as part of that borough-wide transportation plan, it's making a protected bike network. So people can, pedestrians, bicycles, buses, trains, this borough-wide transportation plan should include all modes of transportation, working with communities to make sure that it makes sense for everyone. Thank you.
So I would say the following. First of all, we're having an environmental and climate change conversation like it's separate from all the other plans of the city, right? And that's where we have to change the dialogue that we're having. Every project that's being developed in the city has to make this a major part of the conversation. It cannot be a separate, and let's think about it after the fact. It has to be something that is part of the initial conversations, whether we're building or changing plans, what we're improving on. This has to be part of the normal process, and we can no longer allow it to be a separate conversation. City control and oversight over transportation just makes sense. We need to have that kind of control and no longer allow the state to have that kind of control. That's going to take a big political push to have that change made and a lot of political fighting. The air train, most of these conversations that we have when we sit with communities, we find out that most residents never even had a voice in the conversation. Sometimes they pass the ULUP process, they don't even have public hearings about the situation, and most times when the corporations are coming in, they're actually having meetings to check off a box and to dictate to us what they're going to do, but nothing actually changes after all the protests and all the information is provided. So we need to change that dialogue. The Queens Borough President has the power to have public hearings to ensure that those people who are making these plans are being held accountable, and we have open and fair dialogue where every community has a voice and has input into this process. The fact that most of these things that have been done, and again, we can see it every day, transportation plan, the air train, they have bypassed community involvement, and that can no longer be allowed to happen. Again, elected officials had a voice to be able to stop this process. They had the opportunity, and I'm not talking about exercising our community where we simply go out for a protest, you go home, you feel good about it, and then nothing changed the next morning, right? So if we're gonna go do something, let's make sure we have a fight that's actually gonna cause the changes that are necessary. And when needed, take legal action against the entities or anybody responsible. And if it's other elected officials who aren't getting on board with what our projects are, then we need to hold them and expose them for what they are so the community knows who's been with us and who hasn't been with us the whole time.
Thank you, and the question was on how do we get people out of our cars, right?
Well, the
Okay.
biggest transportation.
Transportation challenges, okay, gotcha. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy. So first off, one of the things we did, and I'm very happy to have fought for, was the return of ferry service to the Rockaways. I think we need to utilize our waterways more. I think there's an opportunity even to connect JFK Airport to ferry service. We should be looking at opportunities to really expand ferry service across the borough. That's the way you get people out of their cars. The other thing I would say is we now have, the state has approved congestion pricing, and there has certainly been a commitment that money would be put back into our buses and trains, and we need to make sure that that lockbox scenario that everybody spoke about is being reinvested back into our communities of Queens, and that comes with accountability. I would also say, and I actually authored some legislation in the council which would expand the use of electric vehicle charging stations specifically on city-owned lots. And when I was the chairman before I warmed the seat up for Costa, one of the things we learned was that there were companies in Queens, like UPS across the city, who really wanted to expand electric vehicle use. They wanted their entire fleet to move to electric, but the infrastructure was not put in place for them to be able to accomplish that. So now we're starting to see the city ramp up on EV charging stations, but we need to see much more of that. Also, the car sharing program, we did that. We have a pilot in the Rockaways where people can actually, at a discounted rate, we assign a few parking spots. People can share cars rather than having. I also would like to see the expansion of dockless biking. It's something that we saw in Rockaway. I think it was just pulled by DOT. But it's a real opportunity to make sure that we really are addressing the transit inequities, because we had people from public housing to homeowners to people who had made 6 figures, and it really did close that transportation gap. I do support both the VQX and the air train. I would say, and I've heard the community very loudly on the air train stuff, is that we do need to ensure that this plan minimizes any challenges that it could present to our waterways. But listen, if you want to get people out of cars, you got to invest in infrastructure and new transportation modes. I'm tired of having to drive from South Queens through to Jackson Heights through LaGuardia, and it's not easy. Listen, I always say, even if I wanted to use public transportation, it's easier for me to get to Florida by plane than it is to get to the Hall of Science by bus or train. So we have to really make sure there's more connectivity when it comes to our transportation in Queens. And the bus redesign plan is an epic fail, but there are some good things in it, and we got to work to make sure that shit works. Thank you.
We need a borough president who will embrace a multimodal strategy to enhance public transportation. Queens, 85% of our borough is considered a transit desert. That means that you have to walk greater than a half a mile to get to a train. We look at our neighbors. Brooklyn has twice as many train stops as Queens. We just don't get our fair share. Long Island Railroad comes through our borough. Sometimes it doesn't stop. The cost is cost prohibitive to too many of our families, and the price needs to be lowered. We have a network of rail roads, one that could connect to Rockaway Beach, and to get Katy into Midtown, high-speed access, and other residents of Rockaway I support a plan that we use our rails. When I was a council member, I had the Lower Montauk Branch study completed after I left, but since have started an advocacy organization to get passenger service back on that line, but to serve Queens residents first. We can get from Rockaway to Astoria by using the Rockaway Beach branch line connected to the Lower Montauk branch and then connected to the Tri-Borough extension. We can increase rail access by 30% in Queens, and the cost could pay for itself, which would create jobs and opportunity and affordable housing all along the right-of-way. I also believe that we could make our buses free. The MTA already subsidizes over 70% of our buses. The comptroller did a report that our average bus rider makes under $30,000 a year, which means many of them are getting a reduced price Metro card, at least qualify for one. And I believe that if our buses were free, more people would take advantage of using a bus rather than paying for an Uber. So in addition to our trains, expanding access to trains, making buses free and creating more bus lanes that are dedicated and work with our signals to make them operate more efficiently. I also support expanding our ferry service, particularly to this section of Queens, to the northeast section by Willets Point, College Point, and also when you compare it to Brooklyn, we have half as many ferries. So it's about time we get our fair share of transit for the 2.3 million people of Queens. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next question is about parks. What would be your plan as Borough President to address some of the issues, and what would you say is the greatest overall capital and infrastructure need for all of the parks? We are in a park right now. It's bigger than Central Park. It's the largest in Queens. So what is the greatest overall capital and infrastructure need in the borough's parks?
Well, the last question was on transportation, and I didn't hit on our two major airports that frankly burden the borough to a large extent without providing any benefits. There are many corporations that are making a lot of money off our airports, and we're not getting a benefit. We have noise, pollution, congestion. We need resources, and to put a dedicated tax on planes that are arriving and departing out of our two major airports to help us pay for improvements in parks. We have to think out of the box, because the borough president at best gets about $80 million a year to spend, not only on parks, but libraries, schools, and the money does not reach the need that the borough has. Flushing Meadow Park here creates an economic engine in hosting the US Open, but too many of our soccer fields are not in shape for a game. And we have situations in Rockaway where we still have so many parks that haven't been renovated and were literally destroyed after Superstorm Sandy. So I would look to creative ways to generate the funds to pay for these needed improvements for our parks.
I love when people talk about the Rockaways, because we've actually leveraged, specifically after Hurricane Sandy, we really worked hard with the Parks Department, with the mayor, to really leverage capital dollars through FEMA, but also through the city as well. And for those of you who may have forgotten, we redid the entire boardwalk in Rockaway, and there was about $200 million left on from FEMA, which we leveraged to put back into creating new parks. So we're not even talking about just renovations. Every park in Rockaway, at least in my district, I could speak for, is under renovation. We also secured $60 million for Bayswater Park. And one of the things I think that's important when we talk about our waterways is how do we create connectivity between the community and our waterways? How do we get our young people to learn more about green education? I talked about the Green NYC initiative. We're funding the Oyster Bay, I forgot the name of the organization, New York Restoration. They're planting oysters with children from our schools in the Bay, which is also a benefit to keeping the Bay clean as well. So I would say we have to put our money where our mouth is. I think also when it comes to park design, ensuring that it contains permeable surfacing is something very important in every design and parks that we're doing. That is included as well. Definitely seeing, like I said, we talked about a lot of green infrastructure money, the $200 million we secured during the time we were the chairman, and we're now utilizing that money also for public housing. So developments like Baisley houses, 40 projects in Jamaica are now getting much more green infrastructure put in place. So I think it's really about leveraging, and yes, the borough president's capital budget is $70 million, but it's going to take being able to negotiate with the mayor and the governor. Specifically, also those partnerships are going to be critical in ensuring we can build out new parks. I'm also happy to say through my rezoning in downtown Far Rockaway, we got about $20 million in park money. We're not only fixing the residents' park and public housing that wasn't touched for the last 30 years, but we're also building a new park right off of Mott Avenue as well. So we've delivered for our district. We have a record in delivering for parks, and that is nearly, if I had to culminate that, how much we put together, it's probably close to about 250 to 300 billion for parks in my district. Thank you.
So again, when we start talking about the maintenance of parks and the ability to maintain them, first of all, we can go to all parts of Queens and we know that they're not equally maintained across the city of New York. They just aren't. When you have your kids going to those parks, you'll see that some schools, some districts get better park structure and more support, and other schools don't. Other parks have a maintenance kind of guaranteed in there, and other parks don't. So when you're talking about the Queens Borough President, we have to have a borough-wide plan to ensure protecting the green spaces that we currently have, ensuring that the parks are maintained in an effective manner, bringing all the parks up to similar codes so that it's the same throughout all of our communities. And then when we're building these new projects, the new buildings that are being done right now, all the current city land that's being given away, we have to ensure that there's a green part to this plan, not just these buildings, right? Again, they are building places and then they're straining what's left of any public space that we possibly have. Families literally in some of these districts, these overdeveloped areas like Long Island City, don't have any place to go anymore. They may have one park in the area and it's not even maintained at this point because it's being flooded out. So when we start talking about a systematic plan in the Queens Borough President Office, you can do something, an overall plan in Queens, so you're not favoring one neighborhood over another, but you're actually teaching and sharing the same information equally across the borough, have sustainability, have the maintenance aspect of it, and at the same time you provide the opportunity to grow new green space that the communities can take advantage of. We're trying to get them out of the cars, we're trying to get them back into the parks, into that area, then we have to have an overall plan to do it. I mentioned one last thing, when we talked about protected bike lanes, there is a caution that I need to tell you about because it's not a conversation that's normally being had. They're trying to build permanent structures in these protected bike lanes, but they're not taking into consideration is that they're now putting emergency response teams at least 3 to 5 feet away from the structures of the people that might need an emergency. So their fire department has expressed great concern about these permanent structures being put in place and not taking into account that they're also blocking fire hydrants and they're blocking emergency access. So somebody could be having a heart attack, but the ambulance driver would have to climb over a barrier, go down to the corner to get the necessary time. So we need to have some other considerations when we talk about permanent barriers and the implication it has on safety measures in our communities.
Just general about the largest kind of infrastructure issue you see in the borough's parks that you would address as borough president.
So I think one of the things we have to really look at is that if you look at the IPCC report, if you look at the president's own report they tried to hide during Thanksgiving 2 years ago, during our Thanksgiving turkey, look at New York City's own report, it talks about how neighborhoods would vanish from the map in the latter part of the century. And that if we don't deal with the rising seas and what that means, then you talk about park infrastructure, we combat climate change, investing in green space, parks are not only beautiful and you improve a community when you build a park, but also they're carbon sinks. So it's about making sure we have additional green space in every single park. It's about not just renovating a park space, but in having it to be more asphalt. But it's adding all the sustainability and resiliency measures that that there's more green to soak up that carbon. There's more rain gardens to soak up that water that's going to flood. And then you look at the city spending over $1 billion in the Lower East Side resiliency plan that they talk about. We need to have a 5-borough resiliency plan. Something where if we know the waters are going to be coming, that our parks, our green space could potentially be permeable pavement, permeable surfaces that are soaking up that water. That you're recognizing the water is going to come and you're building it in that way. I think that's why we have to have a deputy borough president for sustainability and resiliency, who can sort of think about these issues holistically borough-wide. And we need to make sure we make the investments in our parks. So that's one of our first lines of defense on climate change, but it's also about thinking through how we do this in a way that is sustainable, not just in the year 2020 and 2021, but how it's going to lead into the next generation, and that we ensure that we have a long-term plan that protects our communities and protects Queens, and what Queens is in the long term. I know my son's 10 years old right now. The world that he and many of our kids are going to be inheriting is much different. So we need to make sure that our plans fit that.
Thank you. So we're just going to do a quick little lightning round, and in the interest of time, so we're not messing around with the mic, I'll ask the questions. Raise your hand if you do it. Just to be simple enough. The first question is, do you compost?
Oh.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Do you carry, it'll be law soon, do you carry reusable bags to the grocery store? You got marked versus the law.
Except I forgot it last night.
Yes.
But I punish myself actually when I don't. So you will see me walking out with eggs and milk. Because gotta do that.
You got that right
Gotta
here.
do that.
Do you take public transportation to work every week? I mean, on a daily basis?
If we're going into Manhattan, yes.
Waiver. Have you ever swam in any of the borough's bays? That's a trick question. You really can only swim in one. I don't know.
Jamaica Bay just got
And these you could just yell out. What's your favorite park in Queens?
Astoria Park. Come on, it's not a trick question.
Yeah, there's no wrong answer, really.
Rockaway Beach.
I would say Brookville Park is a one.
Okay. All right, that's it. It was very quick. It was a lightning round.
Okay. Please.
So this next question, and Donovan, you had touched upon it, but it's on environmental justice in the borough. So as borough president, how will you guys, whoever wins, ensure that communities of color and lower income communities that have been impacted, whether it be by flooding or by waste transfers, how will you make sure that that gap is widened, and how will you work to actually kind of bridge that gap and improve communities that have been negatively impacted in environmental justice issues? And we can start with Costa Constantinides.
So, almost 20 years ago, they came to us, they came to the Astoria houses, the Ravenswood houses, the Queensbridge houses, which was the largest public house development in the country, and they said, because of reliability issues, we need to place peaker power plants in your backyard with no environmental review. But don't worry, they'll be closed in 3 years. We'll have the reliability issues figured out in 3 years. Well, 20 years later, those communities are still bearing the burden of New York City's power. And the asthma rates in those communities are higher than the Queens Borough average for both ER admissions and hospitalizations. As part of the plan that I'm championing that would transform Rikers Island into a renewable energy island, putting down 100 acres of solar, putting down utility scale battery storage, we could create enough power to shut down every peaker plant. It wasn't just in Queens. It was in the South Bronx. It was in Brooklyn. They placed about 10 peaker plants in the borough, in the city of New York, with no environmental review, all in communities of color. We then need to make sure that those jobs, to rebuild Rikers Island, the communities that were over-policed, the communities that were marginalized and attacked through what happened on Rikers Island, we need to make sure that they're getting first crack at those jobs. Creating opportunities for good union jobs, good green jobs, right here in our neighborhoods. It's about championing things like waste equity. which I was proud to be one of the lead sponsors, you have Donovan as well, working on these issues. We need to make sure we have an asthma study here in the borough of Queens, because Southeast Queens bears way too much of the burden. So we need to make sure we're working on these issues full time, and I'm sure I'll have the opportunity to come back and talk more about these issues as well.
See, having a permanent position in the Queens Borough President's office that deals with environmental and climate impact change is extremely important to have a full-time capacity and team working on that. Also including the experts that we had the ability to meet that have been out here on various panels who have said that they've been left out of the conversation when they have the solutions. They have the studies, they have the work that's been done. They need to be a part of this conversation on an internal level, not just speaking from the outside. We talk about how we make sure that the discrimination level that goes on here, poor communities and communities of color, then you have to make sure that you have somebody sitting at the table that's willing to have that fight. Somebody who's not compromised by special interests or special money or developer money, that kind of thing. These struggles have been going on for many years. So when they sit here and say, again, they have been in poorer communities for quite some time. Some of these projects that they said shouldn't have been here any longer are still there right now. So the question is, where have the lawsuits been? Where has the activity been to hold people accountable and to force these projects out of our community? You need to make sure that you have somebody strong enough that's going to be willing to have the fight, both publicly, both at the board, in the public hearings that we're going to have, and then when it's finally necessary, when the machines of politics or the people behind everything say we're not going to change anything, you have to be willing to challenge them legally and take them to the justice system to hold them accountable. Sometimes you need to sue people in order to make them commit the changes that are necessary, and sometimes it has the people that you're even working with, right? Because these things have not happened overnight. These things have been happening for years, and again, trying to have an effective response where you're willing to take on the people who have allowed this to happen. Sometimes it takes some legislation that's been proposed, but it has to be more than just legislation. It has to be some people who are willing to have the fight. And again, not just exercising people for demonstrations, but what happens the day after the demonstrations? Where are the changes that have been impacting our community, and that we can no longer afford to have people of color and our children and the elderly be impacted by these things simply by saying we passed legislation. There needs to be a different step. Queens Borough President's office and the Queens Borough President can be that effective leadership, partner with the community and say that these changes can no longer wait. They have to be done now.
Yep, got it. So first off, I think when you look at the Borough President's office, it's very important that diversity is central in the staffing level. It's going to be critical that there are people from different backgrounds who have different lived experiences that is really representative of every corner of this borough first, because, you know, I think I read a quote the other day in the paper, if you've never been cut by a knife, you can't understand the pain. I've lived this struggle because I am someone who came up under teenage parents, lived in basements, lived in affordable housing, really had a lot of challenges, and I come from a community where obviously we are the most impacted right here in Queens. I think there are some real things we can do, and I represent the highest concentration of public housing in Queens as well. So there's some things we clearly can do, and this is why I was happy to be the first elected official, I think, in the council to call for smoke-free housing. You know, you think about the impacts of the ventilation system, sharing ventilation, specifically in public housing. When you have children and elderly people whose respiratory systems can't take that smoke, we have an obligation to make sure we're doing more for them. And having smoke-free housing should not be a luxury, because it is a luxury for some, but we can certainly do more to expand that. And just so you know, after that, Julian Castro came down to actually announce that public housing went smoke-free. I talked about the investment and infrastructure, the $2 billion. We need to make sure we are looking out for every part of Queens to make sure there's equity when it comes to DEP's budget. I think with all new developments coming up, we should look to newer technology. So I talked about geothermal technology, and passive house standards being attached to every new development I'm doing in the Rockaways has that attached to it. I also passed the Green Roofs bill in the council, which now mandates every building in New York City being built, new construction, 3 stories or 4 stories above, are mandated to now have green roofs, solar panels or wind turbines on them. So that is something that we can ensure from affordable housing standpoint is happening. The phase out of number 6 oil, making sure that all of that is complete, but also the phase out of number 4 oil. The dirty oil being burned in a lot of our buildings, including public housing, is a detriment to the future of our communities. You talked about waste equity, and I'll just end with saying that I think a lot more education around the future green technologies is critical for communities and connecting them to jobs, and that's why I'm a supporter of Costa's bill, without a doubt, to make sure that we turn the pain that we had on Rikers Island into triumph by really reinvesting back into our communities and reimagining what we can do to make sure our communities move forward. Thank you.
Can you ask the question?
It was focused on the environmental justice aspect of a lot of communities in Queens who have been impacted by
Right. So I'm going to start with Rockaway again, just because when I mentioned earlier about the parks not being renovated, it is true. Maybe the council members part of Rockaway has received the renovations, but it's been over 7 years since Superstorm Sandy, and the federal government allowed for the funds to come into the city for the procurement of these projects. And at least 7 projects have been paid for, and they have not even started, and that's Rockaway Beach. So, well, why did your district get it first then?
Because my job is to lobby for my council district and to ensure that the people of my council district is taken care of. So I'm very happy about all the hammers on the ground. And actually, I just had a meeting with the Parks Commissioner, because I just have to correct when people talk about Rockaway. Rockaway is represented by me and Councilmember Ulrich, but I just want to correct you because as a city council member who's fought very hard for my district, every park in my district is being renovated. There's not a stone unturned. And we'll be happy to also print the designs. If the Hall of Science wants to print the designs right now of every single project, we can do that. But I'm very happy about the progress we're making.
I didn't at all say a project in your district wasn't completed, but you're running for borough president, so you would represent all of Rockaway. And there are 8 parks there that have the funding that come from Superstorm Sandy, and they haven't been renovated yet. It's not fair to the families, and many of those families in those areas can be considered socioeconomically challenged. It's important to make sure that all of our children have access to clean water and clean environments. As a city, we can do more to make sure that we have a cleaner water standards, standards that align with other counties, particularly for the amount of lead in water. We should make sure that 5 parts per billion, that it doesn't have as much as that. That's a standard of knowing that your water is clean. We need to do more to get inside of schools and test for lead, especially most of our schools have been built before 1960, and there really we have lead in a lot of our classrooms. And true abatement needs to happen. It's not fair that our kids are in classrooms with lead, as well as our homes, especially in NYCHA. We've seen over the past couple of months just how bad it really is, and how many children who live in NYCHA have elevated lead levels. So we have to not only hold the city, which is a terrible landlord, but all the private landlords accountable and make sure we get access to these apartments, because it's not fair to the children who are getting exposed.
Thank you. So I think now we're going to move to audience questions, because actually we had a question on the list that was also in our audience. So same rules apply, 2 minutes each, but the following questions are coming from the audience. So this first one is about the collecting and processing of organic waste, both commercial and residential. And if you want to explain a plan you might have to expand that in the borough. I know the city has slowed down its pilot program, so just a plan to bring that to more of the borough.
Okay, so when the organic waste is picked up via the Department of Sanitation from homes, I've gotten complaints as a council member that the people don't have space in their home to hold the organics, and that it would be easier to bring the organics to a location. So if we had organic drop-off spots in our parks, similar to what we do during the holiday season with Christmas and holiday trees, I think that would increase and encourage more of our city residents to recycle and to recycle their organics.
I think we need to see composting fully rolled out across every part of the borough. And there have been, I'm happy to say both my community board and Community Board 12 have it. But this is ridiculous that we can't get composting right in New York City. I mean, it is 2020. So the city needs to fully reinvest and not slow the pilot down. I do personally compost. I can't say everybody in my household does because it's a change in behavior. But I'm happy to say my son's scraps are certainly going into that composting bin, and we have to be able to expand that program more.
Thank you.
So I'm in agreement with what he just said, because he doesn't say the following. We noticed the sanitation department invested in these extra containers that they brought to houses, and then they stopped the program. So we currently still have them outside, and some of them get overstacked, filled, right? And then it's left to the resident, the owner, to be able to figure out how to use it because nobody else is picking it up and collecting it. So having an overall program in the city, we go back to actually collecting it, making it more feasible for families to be able to participate, having other drop-off points, so when you get to those situations where you're full and you're still waiting for sanitation to come, you can be able to use it. And I think you also need to start creating programs to teach families how they can use these wastes effectively. Because just putting them in there and not teaching and not having an education part to it, then people really don't know what it's used for and how it can be used for better use. So we need to put that part of the education project and start increasing it and encouraging home projects to be able to how to effectively use the organic waste that we're having here. And I think that would be more effective and be more useful for all of our communities.
Thank you.
I think we have a large untapped resource when it comes to composting organics collection, which is our schools. Someone brought this up to me today. I think it's a fantastic idea about having the drop-off at our schools when we're dropping off our young people there, and it's also an opportunity for them to learn about composting and organic waste. I know we've put a hydroponic science lab in every school in my district. And I want to do that for the entirety of the borough of Queens because it promotes healthy eating, healthy growing, but also what to do with the waste. When I went to PS 17 to cut the ribbon on our hydroponic science lab there during December, I had a 6-year-old teaching me about composting, and showing me the worms and showing how it all worked. And this kid at 6 years old knew so much more than I knew at 45 years old. And I think, I'm not 48 yet, though. I just turned 45. But but this young person understood it. So I think this is an untapped resource. And then what do we do with that sort of compost and organic waste, right? As part, again, I keep harping back to it, but as part of the plan for Renewable Rikers Island, it's also putting anaerobic digesters on Rikers Island that can take our food waste, that can take our waste, because we spend close to $4.6 million a year to get rid of it, and we have to send it to other states who don't want it, and the trains get stuck. I think it was Alabama where it got stuck for 3 weeks. The communities there were very unhappy and did not want to take our waste after that. We could put it into those anaerobic digesters and actually create renewable energy. Not the renewable energy that the American Petroleum Institute advertises before our movies now, or on TV, not that renewable nonsense, but like real renewable energy that we can actually use here in the city of New York. Thank you.
And this next question is about former transportation. It's about bikeways and ways for safer and a broader bike infrastructure plan. Do you support safe bikeways, whether that be protected bike lanes? And then also, relatedly, do you support, what plan do you support for the Queensway, which is the abandoned rail? There are some who support reactivation of the Long Island Railroad, and then some who support the creation of the Queensway. 2 minutes on these two topics.
I can do 2 minutes on each. We'll try to.
This is like a lightning,
All right, so more of a lightning round. So I think first, we lost a 10-year-old boy in Long Island City late last year. I'm the father of a 10-year-old. I can't even wrap my mind around that family's grief. Not even for a second. I don't know how I would deal with that. And, you know, we need to have a protected bike network. Too often, what I see is the bike lane to nowhere. I know even in my own community, they stopped building the bike lane on 20th Avenue, and they stopped it at 37th Street. We should have, last night in Astoria, we had a town hall with DOT to create a protected bike network. And I think that's what we have to do for the entirety of the Borough of Queens, come up with a borough-wide transportation plan that provides, you know, cyclists the opportunity to get out of their cars and to bicycle to transportation, recreation, and education. In consultation with the community and working with our neighbors to come up with a real plan, not one piece at a time, but coming up with a borough-wide plan. I would love my bike lane on 20th Avenue to go all the way to the LaGuardia Airport. So you could ride from the airport down 20th Avenue and then go to work or to home or to school. And then you talk about the Queensway. You know, we are in need, desperate need in Queens of more green space. We are in desperate need in Queens of more transportation. We need to figure out a way to make both plans work. And that's going to be difficult. But we need to figure out a way to make sure that we have those additional transit options so that the Rockaways and the South Ozone Park are not isolated in the transit desert they are. But we have to double our green space. We have to make sure that we have, you know, the High Line in Manhattan is a beautiful opportunity. We can't miss that opportunity here in Queens. So as Borough President, it's about figuring out and getting people in a room and figuring out with the MTA, with all the stakeholders, to make these things work. And whether it's the money, whether it's the political will, it's about making sure that we come up with long-term plans for those transportation and green space. We can't be forced to choose between these two priorities, which are both desperate in the Borough of Queens.
Thank you.
So I agree with the following. We shouldn't be forced to make choices between one or the other, and it has to be an intelligent conversation, an intelligent plan that we're going to implement. As I stated earlier, some of the places where they're talking about putting the protected barriers, they're not considering the impact of the residents that are living there in terms of emergency response. The fire department has already expressed certain concerns about accessing fire hydrants in case of a fire. So I get on bikes with my sons. We ride through all of Queens. We understand the dangers of coming out in the street sometime, and there's a lot of challenges that we face. So I understand that as a family, as a need to get out there and we wanted to use our bicycles and do these things. But in the same token, we have to also consider the safety issues, not only of the bikers, but of the people and the residents towards getting emergency response services in the proper fashion. So there has to be a balance. People are always trying to make us choose one or the other. One community versus the other, one interest versus the other. That is not the approach that we need to have. We have to have a holistic approach, and I believe that the Queens Borough President can have that overall plan to provide the proper balance and protection that's necessary, that still protects everybody's interest, keeps our children safe, keeps our bikers safe, and at the same time still allows emergency service response and the critical services that are needed for our families if they live in these homes or the businesses, that they still have the equal access that they're going to need as well. Unfortunately, too many of these conversations are pitting one community's interest versus another community's interest, and then it creates a war that nobody wins in that conversation, right? And then there's always a compromise, and nobody gets what they want, and nobody's satisfied at the end of the day. So let's have an intelligent conversation about the plan, where we're sharing information and there's open dialogue, and all parts of our community have a voice at the table. We have to think safety, we have to think about our future, we have to think about alternatives to transportation, real, good, solid alternatives to that do not jeopardize anybody else's life as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think one way to really start to get at the root of these issues, and we got to talk about community boards, because we have 700 community boards, and obviously there really is a disconnect a lot of times between the community boards, and when it comes to the community board, there's also generational divides as well. So what I notice is there are a lot of, I don't want to say just young people, because not only young people ride bikes or cyclists, but there clearly seems to be a divide on the boards when it comes to a lot of issues, and it just seems to be a common word. It sounds like my son. My son's favorite word is no. And no is for everything, no matter what you do. So I think we got to make sure that we have a diversity of opinions on community boards. So let's start there. The other thing is that the Department of Transportation And, you know, they have to do a better job at really speaking to communities. And if you want to have a comprehensive plan on biking and anything else, it all starts with being able to sit at a table and have a dialogue and not force feed communities things either. It really needs to be a true dialogue. And guess what? We're not all here to win a popularity contest. Sometimes there are going to be decisions made that some don't want. But at the end of the day, we have to all be able to sit at a table and come up with a better plan. What I'll say also, just at City Council, I think 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, we found out that cyclists got as many tickets as truck drivers, which is ridiculous. Because I represent an airport community, and I know the communities around LaGuardia Airport also are really impacted by these big tractor trailers that are roaming through our neighborhoods. You cannot tell me that they are more of a danger, cyclists are more of a danger to my community or to our communities than trucks. So we need to make sure more enforcement is happening, and that the NYPD in particular is focusing their resources in places it needs to go. Dockless biking, big fan of it. I saw it work, but once again, that comes with the need to make sure that our roadways have protected bike lanes as well, but it needs to be done comprehensively together with communities. And then lastly, on the Rockaway Beach line, before you want to take this mic from me because I've been going over my time all night. I think we need to find a compromise on the Greenway and the Rockaway Beach line. Rockaway is just such a popular community. I mean, but we need to find a compromise on this plan. And I think that if we do, we can ensure that both sides win, that we both improve transportation, which means people get out of their cars, but then secondary, we provide an opportunity for passive green space in our communities as well. Thank you.
The transportation question earlier, I didn't get to include bikes in it because there's so much to talk about when we think about how we can get people out of cars and increase public transportation. I certainly support the use of bike paths. I prefer them to be protected. Earlier I spoke about rail network that I support, which I brought up the Rockaway Beach branch. In all the rails, they're wide enough to have dedicated bike lane so that when one wants to travel in those directions, they could have that space. As a council member, I supported the Queens Way and helped the northern part of the Queens Way, some of which was in the district that I represented. I believe that we could achieve rail service south of the Forest Park area, and north of Forest Park should remain or should become parkland. The current Rockaway Beach branch has an advocacy called Queens Link, but actually in the 70s there was a plan to connect the Lower Montauk branch, the Long Island Railroad, the one I mentioned earlier, to the Rockaway Beach branch with an underground tunnel right near Forest Park where you could achieve a high-speed rail to get to Midtown Manhattan. I support that. And I do think it's important to have a borough president that would take a leading role in seeing that through and making it happen. And it would certainly be a high priority of mine, given the opportunity to represent. Lastly, I'd like to say, as a council member, I put discretionary dollars, capital dollars, towards making the Brooklyn-Queens Way, which is a bike path connecting the two boroughs, safer. And that was an area near Forest Park on Myrtle Avenue that is incredibly dangerous for bikers, and that is fully funded. It hasn't been improved upon quite yet, but that has a lot to do with when it was funded toward the end of my administration. So I hope I answered all the questions.
I think there's so many
There were a
questions,
lot
and
more.
it's never enough time, but I appreciate, yeah, no, that was the questions. You know, we're just getting towards the end, so I just want to make sure we got so many good audience questions. This one I like this one. Someone asked, other than vote for you, what's one thing you would recommend someone do right now to improve sustainability in Queens? You can just go, yeah.
Walk more.
Walk more.
Yeah, I would say get out of your cars. That's the number one way to make sure that we're utilizing transportation as a key way we can really ensure community more sustainable.
other than vote for us, I say that you need to be conscientious participants in the entire process. Do not fall asleep on any of these meetings and the hearings that are being held right now, because that's where the decisions are being made. You have to be at that table. Love to have you out exercising. I walk a lot with my kids. I get on the bikes with them. Love to have you out of the cars. That is something that we can do. But the reality is they're having these meetings all over the place, and we're being excluded from the conversation and decision part. So it's organized. Raise your voices collectively and help me be a part of your team in saying that our voices need to be heard holistically, and we can no longer allow the regular business to go on where these environmental concerns are not being addressed. We're talking about sustainability, we're talking about a lifetime of change in our communities. We're all talking about our kids and we're all talking about our own futures. We need to be a part of the conversation. So what might say organize, raise your voices louder than ever so that you can be heard and we cannot be forgotten.
Beyond just voting for one of us or to get out of your cars, which absolutely has to happen, I would say get on mass transit and go to a battleground state this year.
That's true.
We need to vote out the person in the White House. We need to make sure that the EPA is actually the Environmental Protection Agency again, because right now it's the Elegant Pen Association, because the only thing they do there is give each other silver pens to then cross out environmental legislation. So whether it's our waterways, whether it's our clean air, whether it's our clean water, this president doesn't believe that climate change is real and believes that windmills can give you cancer. So I think get on, beyond voting for one of us or getting out of your cars here in Queens, going on mass transit to another state to make sure that we have a new president who actually believes in climate change is the best thing you can do for Queens, for New York State, and for the entire country. Thank you.
I'm going to double barrel the last question because we do have a few more minutes. We're going to shove in two transportation questions. The first is, what's your opinion? Do you support or are you opposed to the LaGuardia Air Train to the airport from Wells Point? And the city's own data shows that most of the New York City ferry riders are white and wealthy. What's a way that you would like to diversify the users of the ferry and make it more accessible to a different group of people?
So I've been very clear about I don't support the current iteration of the air train. I do believe it's going to create problems for our environment. I believe we need to be conscientious on how we're going to spend $2.5 billion. I still have a lot of concerns that I feel still need to be answered. And I'm working with many of the advocates in this room around that issue. We do need to figure out a way to get people to the airports, but it has to be in a way that doesn't disturb our waterways, that works for everyone, and isn't $8. And then secondly, when you talk about the ferries, right, it has to be you have so many residents who, the ferries have been a huge success, but it hasn't been a success for everyone. So having integration, I heard, once the Omni is online, right, that's one of the biggest reason I heard that we're not integrating the ferry service into our mass transit system. It's that once the Omni is online, once that opportunity presents itself, it's about integrating that into the sort of MTA's sort of, MetroCard swipe, but it won't be MetroCard, right? And then, so making sure you can have transfers. Because very often it leaves you in a place that maybe you can't get to, or it's not part of mass transit, you have to pay 2 fares. We just passed the Fair Fares program, providing for low-income New Yorkers to have a half-fare swipe. It's making sure that once it's integrated, that we have the Fair Fares program for our ferries as well, so that we're making sure that everyone are able to participate in this ferry, because the residents of the Astoria houses in my district, it's 1,515 feet to Manhattan. They can see Gracie Mansion from their house. Not that I've gone on Google Maps and check that out. But those residents, if they had to take just mass transit, it would take them an hour. If they get on the ferry, it would take them 20 minutes to get to Manhattan. But how do we make it economically viable to do so in that integration process and having the Fair Fares program, making it accessible to everyone? That's something we can do that makes a lot of sense.
Air train, no, right? Air train, they built it, they didn't involve the communities voice. They didn't talk about the impact, the environmental impact. They didn't have any benefits for local residents. They want to move people from the airports from different places to Manhattan. The total focus of any changes that they're making is how do we get people into Manhattan. They're not talking about transportation within the borough. They're not talking to transportation where we visit other communities. So they're isolating us in all of the plans that they're talking about. We need accessibility and affordability. So where we have these ferry checkpoints coming in, the ferry accessibility has to be at places where poor people have access, and then it has to be affordable. So the integration into our total transportation plan, again, that's where the Queens Borough President can have a voice in all the plans and alternatives to transportation, alternatives to the cars, and if we're having this as part of our overall plan, then it has to be affordable, make sense for everybody to be able to utilize. If they're going to build something and outprice any community or disenfranchises any community, then it has to be rethought and re-examined, and we have to go back to the drawing board because it is not a successful program. We're not building alternatives to cars and to go to public transportation, so that it becomes accessibility and transportation for those who can afford it. It defeats the entire purpose of it, right? And that's what this whole conversation is about. It's about developing a plan that makes sense for all of our communities to be able to be a part of and not be excluded from. And so when we look at this, we need to make sure, again, that it has the accessibility points, that every community has an opportunity to participate, that it is affordable, and that we integrate it into a connectivity or a collective process where it integrates with our public transportation system as well as trains and buses, because we're going to take some of those ferries, like Costa said, they go to areas, they drop them off, and then they have nowhere to go. Who's going to pay 2 fares again? You're paying $8, it's too much. It's the same thing they started with the Long Island Railroad, when you try to make that more affordable for the common person. We need to have a different conversation, take control of all those access ways that are coming into our borough, and saying that we need to control that point and make sure it's affordable and accessible to every one of our communities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and I'm going to have to run because I have an event at 8 o'clock. I'm going to be a little late for it. Let me just say with LaGuardia, I'm certainly supportive of it. However, I do believe that we need to see a much more comprehensive plan around investments in the current public transportation system. As someone who actually has an air train already in Southeast Queens, we have the Jamaica air train already. I know we're definitely getting people out of cars, definitely. I can only imagine what the bandwidth would look like if we did not necessarily have the air train. It would be 10 times worse than what it is already. I do have a ferry service. One of the recommendations I made to the mayor was to at least try to figure out a way until we can expand that ferry service further down the beach where most of my public housing residents live, in lieu of that until it happens. And Anthony Weiner, obviously when he was a congressman, secured money for an additional landing, which could be helpful with this. So we are currently working with EDC on a study for expanding it, but we need to see more of emphasis by the administration to really pay attention to this. And right now, what we're seeing is the Economic Development Corporation obviously has sets all of the rules around the ferry service across the city. And if we can't get this right, perhaps we should move this out of EDC's hands and move it into the Department of Transportation's hands to manage so that we can have much more oversight over it. So if they cannot, and this is something I'm quoted on in the New York Post, which it's not, anyway, everybody knows the New York Post, but they got this right. They got this right. They pointed out the disparities in the numbers of who is taking the ferry, and if you're really trying to address transit equity and environmental justice, the people who are closest to the pain have to be able to get on the boat. Thank you all for having me this evening. I'm sorry I do have to run, but God bless you all. We look forward to seeing you out on the campaign
We just
trip.
want to take, I know they wanted to take a quick group photo, but we want to just pause and then we'll get to Liz, and then we'll do closing statements. I'm sorry we ran a little bit over.
No problem.
Everybody give a round of applause. I think they'll smile much brighter when we're to have our great candidates. Let's hear it. Nice. Really fun. Thank you.
So 35,000 people work at JFK, our airport. When you talk about great disparities on the ferry, I'd like to see a report as to who really takes the air train. Because if you're working at JFK, you certainly cannot afford to pay $8 to take that air train. The air train should be free. We need to look at ways of making public transit more affordable or free. And that's why I do not like the current plan for the LaGuardia Air Train. First, the current air train is not good enough, and we need to look at connecting the air trains together, or connecting New York City transit trains to the airport. We need a one-seat ride where you're not getting out or off of the train. And in a city like New York, the major city, the most major city in the entire country, we need that. And so that, I believe, answers the air train question. As it relates to the ferries, we do not have enough ferries, and the ferries are in sections that are hard to get to if you don't live near them or walking distance. And I think that's part of the reason you have great disparities. It's a pleasant experience to take a ferry, and I would like to take a ferry more. I just like, if I live in Glendale where I live and I want to get to the east side of Manhattan, I'd love to take the ferry from Hunter's Point, but getting to the 7 train is very difficult for me. So that's why if I had the Q&S rail, I certainly would be able to get to that ferry, to use that ferry. And anytime I've used the Rockaway ferry, it's been a pleasant experience. And I think that we just need to have more ferry stops. We need more ferry stops in Rockaway. We can have a ferry stop at JFK, it makes total sense. But we need ferries on Northern Queens, not just Astoria and Long Island City, but near LaGuardia, near Willets Point, near College Point. And then we'll be better served and probably have more people of color or more people who have varying degrees of socioeconomics taking the ferries as well.
Great, thank you. So we're going to allow the candidates here to do closing remarks, 2 minutes. The timekeeper is he's going to really go after you over this time. I should have been doing that too. And then we're going to hear from Melissa Zavala, a board member of the Jackson Heights Beautification Group, to close us out. So I guess, Liz, if you'd like
Okay,
to
and then I'm going to leave just after my closing statement. I wish I could stay longer, but I too have another event. So I'm going to go into my closing statement, and then I'm sorry I can't stay away around for Jackson Heights beautification announcement. But so I was able to be a New York City Council member. It was a great opportunity. I couldn't think of a better job at the time, and I can't think of a better job to serve the people of Queens than Queens Borough President. I was known to be a reformer in the City Council. When I first got in there, I fought the mayor to save firehouses, and we won. I fought the speaker when we didn't give enough discretionary funding to every district, and we changed the policy of the City of New York and made it fairer. I fought against the library chair who was building an elaborate smoking deck and was cutting library hours left and right and staff, and we were able to oust him. I believe that Queens needs a leader that's going to fight for its fair share. When we look at our environmental impact, the greatest thing we could do to help Queens is to build out our public transit. And no other candidate running for Queens Borough President has a better transit plan. Building out our rail system by 30%, reducing the cost of trains, making buses free. These are all ways we can achieve getting people out of the cars and onto our public transit. I studied architecture and urban planning because I wanted to make sure that I had a hand in building sustainable cities. I firmly believe that Queens could be the first county in the state of New York to go carbon neutral. We have good ideas. We should work at this together. It's time for us, and it's time for Queens. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Rick. Oh, sure. It wasn't me.
So, we start by saying, how many people been to the community board meetings? All right? So, one of the first things I would say as Queens Borough President is we'll change how that operates, where the community gets to wait there to the end of the night, the last 10 or 15 minutes to have a conversation while the board discusses everything else. That should change immediately. Community residents, when they go there, should be heard first when all the people are sitting at the table, because by the time the community starts to speak, you've already lost half of the board going somewhere else. And then you see these problems going on throughout all of Queens currently where people have issues, they're not being heard. So first we change that. The second thing I say is, when we're talking about allocating money to BQX and other projects, you're talking about huge expenditures where they haven't fixed the current problems that we're facing right now. So at some point you have to say we have to make some common sense here. Stop spending the money in other projects and start fixing the infrastructure which we need and desperately need to have fixed right now. Again, these problems didn't happen overnight. They happened by years of neglect. So when we see, again, certain neighborhoods are taken care of versus the other neighborhoods of Queens, they'll tell you they advocated for their districts. But they also have to tell you that they were witness to the abuse that's gone on in other communities and didn't quite get up to address the entire borough of Queens, but they were the ones who were suffering the disparity and the injustices when it comes to climate and environmental change. Again, it's more than just holding one person accountable. They have each other to hold accountable. They need to be more accountable to the community as well. All the current problems that we're currently having is a lack of voice and input for community residents. The constant and continual complaint has been that the community's voice has not been heard collectively. They're being disregarded when these decisions are made. And these projects that you see, all these luxury buildings that are being built, all this free space, city space that's being given, city property has been given away for overdevelopment. City council people voted on it and approved it. So hold them accountable for what you're seeing now and the injustice that you're experiencing. Hold them accountable because they approved those projects, maybe not in their areas, but they absolutely approved it in all the rest of Queens. Hold them accountable. Queens Borough President has to be an independent voice that's willing to challenge the process and the system. Can't be a part of it. You have to be a little bit separate. You got to be willing to take on that challenge, and you got to be willing to be the voice of the community. I'm Anthony Miranda, and I'm the candidate running for Queens Borough President, so thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Costa Constantinides, and we've talked a lot tonight about transforming Queens and how that would work. Whether it's using the powers of the land use to ensure that we have truly affordable housing and sustainable building in the borough of Queens, and in addition to that sustainability, part of that sustainability is good union jobs attached to development. It's about using the budgetary power of the Borough President's office to combat climate change, the challenge of our lifetimes. So it's creating a Deputy Borough President for sustainability and resiliency, rather than having someone driving the Borough President around in a black SUV. That's making sure that we're doubling our green space, solarizing and green roofing every city building in the borough of Queens. It's looking at how we connect that sustainability to our schools. So as we're solarizing our schools, we can ensure we have solar curriculum, putting new hydroponic science labs in every school in Queens, new technology in our classrooms, so make sure that our kids have the equipment to be the climate warriors that we need them to be in the 21st century. It's about you being your county executive, being your fighter. It's about making sure that we have someone who's fighting to have an MTA board municipal control. I firmly believe in it. But if we can't get that, we need to have a voice at the table. And I've already have a plan that's already being endorsed by Ruben Diaz Jr., a current borough president in the Bronx, and state legislators who already have bills in that place. And you have to have a borough-wide transportation plan that includes mass transit and bicycling. We need to make sure that we talk about diversity. Too often, our communities of color are on the front lines. We need to have satellite offices in communities like they do in Manhattan. We need to make sure that we have a diverse office, a team working for the Queens Borough President. And we need to make sure that things like Power Now, those inequities, those failures are dealt with and rectified, and that we empower those communities who too often have bore the brunt of the environmental justice challenges in this borough. Again, my name is Costa Constantinides. I'm running to be your next Queens Borough President, Transform Queens. You can go to votecosta.com to hear all of our environmental plans that I didn't have a chance to talk about today because my last name was too long. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Melissa, thank you so much.
Let's hear it for the home.
Thank you to all, to the candidates, to the legal conservation voters for arranging this, as well as for inviting
inviting us, the Jackson Heights Beautification, and to everybody in attendance for coming out on this lovely and cool night. Good evening to everyone. My name is Melissa Zavala, and in my professional life, I'm an anthropologist who studies urban sustainability around New York City, in the areas, in particular, conservation. My research hinges on two related conservation themes, waste management and land preservation in the form of urban parks. I don't need to explain to anybody here, of course, just how important parks are to city residents. And parks aren't important just to us humans, they're also important to many other life forms as well. And so for these and other reasons, we really do need to invest in parks, which is a lot of what the candidates have talked a bit about. And of course, coexisting with all of these diverse species on so many different levels is, of course, or should be a priority. It's not always, but this is one of the reasons why we're also here to think through these ideas and to see how we could implement.
Could you use the other microphone? We can't really hear you.
Maybe I'm not close enough. Oh, maybe I'm sorry.
No, we're over here.
It feels
Over
so
here.
strange.
Just use this now. Oh, okay. But it's not long enough.
How about this? If I speak directly into it? Okay, sorry about that. But besides being here as an anthropologist, I'm also obviously invested in an effective environmental agenda for our city as a general resident and city voter, and also as a member of the Jackson Heights Beautification Group, which is the reason why I'm here. So the Jackson Heights Beautification Group has been around for 30 years. We're a community organization consisting of all volunteers and working in Jackson Heights. It's a very richly diverse cultural epicenter, if you've never visited, although I'm sure everybody has, right? Because I think most of us, if not all of us, are from Queens. It's a community that consists of many linguistic and cultural groups. We understand that there are many important aspects that make up a community, and we try to address those in the services we provide with a range of programming, from street tree care to musical concerts, graffiti removal, street cleanups, gardening, a dog run, neighborhood composting, as well as many other regular programs, from parades to art contests for students in our local public schools and others. This is just to give you a sense of the kinds of various programs that we run for many different kinds of members, intergenerational, and so on in our population. Working locally while thinking globally is an invaluable model for inspiring action. And with this type of work in mind, tonight I'm serving as a person tasked with the challenge of providing some kind of closing remarks to an informative meeting with our candidates before our president. And so I want to reflect on tonight's agenda by also taking inventory of the already existing city efforts for addressing environmental challenges. Nobody really here talked enough about Plan NYC, but I saw it as a foundation for laying in the work of a future program, especially for Queens, right? There are already target areas that are vital to thinking about sustainability and implementing plans and programs that could be very helpful. The Plan NYC targeted 10 areas in particular: housing and neighborhoods, parks and public spaces, brownfields, waterways, water supply, transportation, energy, air quality, solid waste, and climate change. So all of these have been touched on in various ways by the candidates, including accessing our waterways and really enhancing the educational opportunities for people to reconnect, having the communities, especially around the waterways, reconnect with their waterfront. And more than that, obviously, that we also need clean waterways. I've also worked with the park rangers, the urban park rangers before, and one of the things that we did was try to connect communities with their waterways, because oftentimes, not only have they been polluted for a very long time, but people also feel disconnected because we tend to also, this is probably a legacy of Moses as well, right? To have extensive driveways right along the waterfront, which disconnects communities from these vital places. In thinking about Plan NYC, we can also consider that over 97% of the 127 initiatives that were launched within that first year following the plan's release, almost 2/3 of those milestones were achieved, or mostly achieved, which is a good start. So we have momentum, and we have
interest, obviously, and our commitment. And I really will take the political will and the desire and the vision to really pursue these things. So this has been called the most far-reaching plan so far, and has had follow-up agendas that include Open NYC, which helps get us to think about preparing for population expansions that will lead to over 1 million, right, in the next 2 years. I'm forgetting, I did not put that in how long that expansion has been estimated. There's also Maintain NYC, repairing aging infrastructure, and Green NYC for conserving resources and cutting carbon emissions by 30%. So all of these are target goals that we could, again, build a real constructive agenda around. So what else can we do to improve the quality of life for residents while also lessening our carbon footprint? This is one of the things that we're here to hear about from the candidates, and to see what some of their plans include. To some extent, our city's high density is our strength, even while living jowl with so many people doesn't sound like an appealing future, right? Especially when we consider that this future will be a hotter, more crowded one. So this is, again, all the more reason to really think about these things seriously and plan ahead in a committed, visionary way. But anyway, despite this growth and the fact that climate change poses many challenges, we continue to expand, and the gains should be, of significant use for all of us. We have some challenges ahead, and so we'll need imaginative leaders who will help us navigate policy that we can use to our advantage, and to make this the cleanest, safest, most equitable, and greenest place to live. We have a group of candidates here who are willing to take on the daunting challenge of envisioning and implementing plans for future growth that will be in keeping with the kinds of needs we will have to be a resilient global city. So let's work together to bring about the types of changes that will help us become an ever greener Big Apple. Thank you again, and good night.